Issaquah City Council Committee of the Whole meeting for this day, Tuesday, June 24th, 2014. We have two items on the agenda this evening. The first is a presentation discussion about a potential Eastside winter shelter. And then second on the agenda is we're going to get a briefing on the ADA, the American Disabilities Act transition plan here in the city of Issaquah. And then we'll wrap this up with our regional committee reports from council members. We're going to get started. We're still expecting council members Martz and Barber to show themselves, though council member Pauly will not be here this evening. So the first item up this evening is regarding a potential Eastside winter shelter, and we're going to be hearing from Arthur Sullivan from a Regional Coalition of Housing, or ARCH. As a matter of introduction, this topic, one of the regional committees I serve on is Eastside Human Services Forum, and the forum sponsored a mayor's breakfast a couple months ago and invited mayors and some other city leaders and electeds to this breakfast. Mayor Butler attended, and to where this idea of potentially creating a regional solution for a permanent winter shelter or shelters here on the east side was discussed with the mayors. I think the idea, it's an idea that is in the incubation stage, and we're going to hear a bit about why here, why now, and also it's being led by ARCH, and we're going to hear more about it tonight because one possible way to make it happen is through the Housing Trust Fund that we contribute to. And I'm interested tonight to hear a little bit more on how it may differ from other uses of the Housing Trust Fund. And also, I think one reason it's a possibility that we can even have this conversation is that and Art, you'll probably fill in the blanks here, I want to say the people who run the 10-year plan to end homelessness, that organization, or was it I'll think of the name in a moment, has identified in their strategic plan the need for shelters outside of Seattle in the greater region, including King County, and identified the need for a shelter on the east side as a need. And as such, that may give the east side access to even additional funds should we go forward with such a program. And I think we're going to hear tonight a little bit about the recent history of what has gone on regarding providing winter shelters, the success and the struggles. I've watched it progress over the last few years. Obviously, in the forum, we watch it closely. Really, things started with the city of Bellevue 4 or so years ago, and it has progressed. And I think there's more people recognizing the ongoing need. Certainly people have taken advantage of the fact that shelters have been available. And now we have some even more information. And now is the time to be having a consideration for a regional solution for permanent winter shelters. So the first part of the presentation, Arthur, I'm going to invite you to the podium and look forward to your discussion and sharing with our fellow council members tonight this idea and what we still need to do going forward.
Okay. Thanks, Councilmember Winterstein. So I think you gave a really nice introduction to the topic, and just for your information, in the packet you have both a cover memo as well as the actual handout that was used in that meeting with the mayors about 2 months ago. And so I'm going to touch on parts of that, but as much as anything, hopefully if you have any questions at any point on the different aspects, I'm ready to just jump in and ask away. We were asked to do this at the mayor's meeting. As was said by Councilmember Winterstein, this is very incubator stage, but I think a little bit more serious incubator stage now. The mayors thought that the thought process that went into the report and the background work we did rang true in a lot of ways. And so they have encouraged us to sort of take the next step in the planning effort. And that's something to emphasize here is this isn't, we're starting something from scratch. This is building upon something that has been occurring for the last 4 or 5 years. So the mayor's asked us to come and talk or present this background information to all the various member councils of Arch as a heads up, to give you sort of a, this is being worked on. They thought it would be important for you to be aware. It may be something that comes up in your budgets eventually, but I'm going to touch upon that as well to some extent. In terms of Arch's role, too, as Councilmember Winterstein has been saying, there has been shelters for both men and women being operated for the last 4 or 5 years. Arch has not had a direct role in that. However, if you go to this report and go to, and I don't know how it's numbered in your packet, but if you go to the 11th page, which is the next to last page in there, you will see that what has been going on the last few years, and actually if you go to the last page, is it started as a weather-triggered overnight place to stay, which meant only on certain nights when certain weather conditions were met. That quickly evolved within a year or two into a wintertime shelter program, so that it was open from anywhere from 3 to 4 months a year, depending on the amount of funding that was available. And then if you turn to that next, and that's sort of referring to this graphic that you see here, the page before that is a chart showing how the different cities, a number of Arch members already have been participating in the operational elements of this shelter program. And what you're seeing here is that at this point in time, there is a men's shelter, there is a women's shelter that also serves children, and now this year, a married couple with children can also stay there. And also, and something, one of the lessons learned, which is one of the other things we've tried to highlight in this report, is the lessons learned over the last few years, is day services. And both the women's and the men's now have different kinds of day service programs. And then you'll see in that last column there, outreach, which is a way of police officers or people in the community, if you come across someone who looks like they need help, they're out there trying to talk to individuals who may need the services of the shelter programs and the services, and bring them in and start building up, their trust, and hopefully help them move forward in their situation of being homeless. So this, as you can see, this has been going on, and learned a lot of positive things, which are described actually in an appendix in here and in the memo. And some of those highlights are, as I was just sort of alluding to, is there are a number of people who've been homeless who've been resistant to wanting assistance and stuff, and for a variety of different reasons. And yet, weather triggered, they come in because they just really need it, and it's helped build up a working relationship with the people who are providing the services, and has seen this as a first step in a pathway out of homelessness for a number of people in the past who just sort of did not take up the opportunities that were available in the community. So that's been a very positive. The day services, and having day services engaged with also in combination with just the shelter. And so having a more systematic approach has been another one of the major lessons learned. The reason why we've gotten involved, though, is because one of the lessons learned, or one of the huge challenges of this effort that's been going on, is the siting of shelter and the day center, but in particular the shelter. Every winter they've had to find a new location. There have been issues about the women have had to move, I think, 2 or 3 times in a winter, partially because they're generally using church facilities, faith community facilities, but sometimes either the faith community can't afford to have the space they're using utilized for that long a period of time, and or the city regulations do not allow them to be there for more than 60 days. So they jump around and move around. One year, the men's was located in a single-family neighborhood that did not have transit service in severe weather. Kind of not a good fit. And so one of the things we've learned is the amount of energy. In fact, we almost did not have a winter shelter last year for men. It was literally less than a week from when they normally open that finally Sound Transit had a warehouse that they had bought as part of Eastlink that they said could be used for winter, and it looks like they'll let them use it again this winter. But if not for that, there would not have been any location for the main shelter. The energy that human services staff have spent trying to find a location, rather than providing service, the process, the location. And so where Arch came on board was seeing that phenomenon and seeing how many of our members have been participating in this. Our board asked us to come in and say, why don't you help lead a conversation about maybe something a little different, looking at the siting issue. And so that's what we've been doing for the last year plus. We've been working with the Arch Executive Board, which now includes Mr. Harrison, and previously your Mayor Freisinger. So we have members of all the cities participating. The work team includes the staffs of the agencies who are providing the shelter, plus the human services staff from the Eastside cities who are providing assistance. So the people who've been having this conversation, we've been the facilitator, not the leader or the brain, other than just pulling everyone and all the resources together. And so what that is sort of the outcome of that effort, if you go back to that chart, is the concept of a permanently dedicated space, presumably one for men and one for women and children, presumably not at the same location, but we haven't ruled that out explicitly. Some lessons learned the first year where it was when it was co-located. So it may be feasible to do it all in one location, but the odds are, you know, the preference is to have separate locations because of issues with the people who are coming and stuff. And the idea being to build upon what we have now. So right now we have the operating program up to 4 months of the year. And actually this year I think it actually went closer to 5 months for the women. Is to say if we had a dedicated location, it could be a space that would serve the needs of both the shelter and the day services. And so in the packet, there is actually a little description of what that kind of space may look like. And it's about a 7, 8, 9,000 square foot space for up to around 50 people. Okay? And the idea is we need about capacity for 100 or just over 100 combined between the two types of shelters. And so that's sort of the, as they say, sort of the nutshell of what we've pulled together. And what we, and based on the meeting with the mayors, is we've been asked, keep working on this, okay? And so the other, as Councilmember Winterstein was saying, is now you got a capital component. And this is where we're saying the capital component, the Arch members already have a system for doing capital for having a roof over your head, and that's the trust fund. And so we have started the conversation as to whether or not the trust fund would be a good fit. We did, and I can't recall, I don't see in my records here, we helped Sophia Way do a different type of shelter in the basement of a church facility. In fact, any of you who went to our workshop this year got a tour of that facility. We helped fund that. And so we are looking at if we can fund, and what has changed and what makes this timely, besides the fact that we have the issues that we've identified, we've also had the need. This winter, the men were averaging 70 men a night, I believe, and the women were getting close to 50 every night, or getting close to that figure between women and children. So we've seen that the need is here. It does exist. But the timeliness is, as Councilmember Winterstein was saying, is that the Committee to End Homelessness, that's what you were trying to remember the name of, which does the 10-year plan to end homelessness, which is agencies and public staff from a wide range of public agencies provide the housing and the services for homeless, have a countywide plan, and the effort focused the first 8 years on permanent forms of housing. And what has been happening in the last year and a half or so is saying, those are all great. You know, we need an overall system to deal with homelessness, but shelter is still a piece of it. We still need it, and especially outside of Seattle, we need it for single adults in particular because we have so little, and because of the overall housing issues in our communities, there is still a great need for it. So CEH just a year ago changed their priorities and said, we believe that for homeless, funding shelter is reasonable on the capital side. So when we did Sophia's Way, we could get no help from the county. It was just us and the private community who funded that. Now all of a sudden we've opened the door to the county capital housing funds, which then in turn opens the door to the state housing trust fund to the extent it exists, potentially. So now all of a sudden you have all the public funders that often are in many of the properties that you see that we bring to you are potentially lined up to help fund something along these lines. So that's what also makes it timely, is that CEH has said this is a timely thing to work on. So Where we're at right now is based on the mayor's meeting, and I think it's listed in the memo, the next steps that we have is that we've identified principles in terms of putting something together. And those include that build upon what we've been doing, try to get away from this ongoing siting issue that we've been struggling with the last 3 or 4 years. Understand that this is a first step in an engagement to help move people through homelessness and out of homelessness. That this should be tailored to the experiences of East King County. We must, in the siting of the shelter, take into account a variety of factors, including access to day services, access to transit is most important, and we're generally saying it would not be in an all-residential neighborhood. So where it's been located, sometimes we are thinking more in our centers is where it would potentially be located, in our mixed-use or commercial areas. So we want to focus in the right locations and not wherever it pops up. And so we have a map that we've kind of pulled together with the help of your staff and all the other planning staff in the agencies. And so it would be a targeted outreach effort to find it in the right location that works for the broader community as well as those who are homeless. And then it needs to be a system. So what we're trying to do is design the shelter, the services, the outreach, all of those components, and this becoming a focal point where it can be building upon what we've done now. And an important thing in saying building upon what we are now is while that chart shows you a lot of public support from the formal public sector, there's also been a very large amount of public support from the private community, especially through the faith community. They've been finding the spaces, they've been providing volunteers, they've been providing all of the meals. So the idea behind this is potentially to grow public support, not necessarily from the public sector, but rather from the broader community, or both, or a combination of that. By having it be through Arch, we may find other cities may find ways to potentially participate and help on the ongoing basis. But what we are saying is it's meant to build upon. So it may just operate initially, or we don't know how long, on a part-time basis. It still may not go immediately full-time. That will be dependent upon how the whole community, public and private, respond to what is created. And with the private capital part, we are assuming there would be some capital from the private sector, fundraising, which is often common with what we do. So those are some of the basic principles. The work that we're looking at over the next few months is to start engaging more players in the community on a small scale or basis. So going to some of the business communities, going to the neighborhoods where the shelter has been located, and starting to talk to people about what's the right way to do this. Not just from the agency's point of view, but from other perspectives in the community. So we plan on starting to do that as soon as we've talked with all the councils. We are looking at a process, and we're just starting to say, is the best way to put any housing dollars from the cities in is to do it as a set-aside, kind of like what we do with group homes, where we say we're willing to spend this much money because you don't have a site yet, because you may need the resources to be able to buy a piece of property. Kind of what we do with single-family homes, where if you don't have the money, you can't actively search. And so we're looking at actually doing a review through the Arch Trust Fund process. And we're talking with the county tomorrow about how they may help initially as well with the land acquisition element of it. So we're kind of pulling together the plan on how to actually, you would fund it. Budgets, the mayor's asked us, show us what the budget implications potentially are. And as I said, it'll be a range. It'll be, well, it's what we have between the trust fund already and operating that you've done. And if you wanted to go full-time, here's what are sort of the magnitude ranges and stuff. So it'll be sort of something to help inform you. And then working with some of the cities on some of their potential siting issues. Some of the cities have regulatory issues in areas that have been identified as potentially good locations. So we want to have conversations with those cities saying, should you have a conversation about regulatory so that when we are ready to look for site, we know that there's the community willing to look at that issue. So those are some, and do any communities have, so we don't have to buy a piece of land, do we have the opportunity to use a piece of surplus land or church property or something along those lines, and a church property that is appropriately located. And then, so I think those are the main things that we're working on in the balance of the year. So you could, in terms of our timing, see something at the end of this year in terms of a trust fund recommendation the next time we come back to you. But we'll have other types of information in terms of what the service is and more descriptions of what the program actually might look like. So that's kind of what we've been working on, and opening up to questions and stuff.
So, Art, one thing I've been wondering, to use the trust fund, there are very specific criteria that have to be achieved.
Right.
Could you go over those? I think it involves really approval from all members of the coalition.
So so how our process would work is there would be an application to us, the Citizen Advisory Board, which does include a person who works in Issaquah as well as lives in Issaquah, as well as from people throughout East King County. They would be reviewing an application. We then go to the Executive Board. They develop a recommendation and also conditions that would go. Something like this, there'd probably be more conditions than normal because you may not have a site identified. So it would be, you have this much time, wherever you find it, and you need to go make sure it's okay, the site location. Then what happens is we go back to all the individual councils who we would be proposing help provide funding. Something like this, my guess is we would be asking all the cities for some level of funding. So we would be going back to all the councils, presumably in the first quarter of next year. In terms of how this fits into our funding criteria, we have always taken, I think there's sort of two important things to keep in mind in terms of the criteria and how we approach funding housing through the Arts Trust Fund. The first is we've all agreed that, through meetings with council representatives over the years, as well as our housing needs analysis, that the trust fund has been a tool to help all kinds of housing needs in our communities. So we've had long-term goals to help families, seniors, homeless and I specifically identified subgroup, and persons with special needs. So we've already been saying we've been assisting homeless since the second year I've been doing this, since the second year of Arch. We have been helping housing targeted to homeless. Not so much shelter per se, but we then did do Sophia Way a few years ago. So as a term of being something we would do, or is it taking away, every year we do new projects with the capital funds. And so this would be potentially the homeless project for the next year or so. Timing-wise, it's relatively good because we funded a lot of other types of homeless housing in the last few years for families, singles in permanent housing, young adults. So we have been funding a lot of other pieces of that system that CEH is trying to create. We haven't been funding this so much, so it might create a good balance in looking at it. And the advisory board will look at that. The other element is we know we're in East King County. We know we're in a high-cost area. And we know that it can be challenging to find locations that work. So we've tried to be fairly flexible in terms of saying what can apply. We then use conditions to make sure it feels like a good fit what's coming out the door, and we're asking councils to support and have some of the resources go towards. Because we've always been nervous that if we say it must be here, it must be exactly there, then all of a sudden you're losing potential opportunities. And so the criteria, the executive board asked us to go look at all of our criteria to see, does this fit within our basic criteria? And the answer is yes, it can. The real crux to how we work at Arch is we know other public funders have their criteria. That's another thing we have to leave flexibility for, is we try to create balance over time. Balance of type of housing, balance across the region. And so, but the guidelines are, we tailor kind of looking at each project to make sure it then fits into the community. So from that point of view, that process will be, when we come back to you, is all the conditions we come up with to say, this is what we think it takes for it to be a good fit.
Nina?
Thank you, Arthur. I'm sort of new to this topic. Well, I'm new to this topic, let's just say that. So pardon if I ask a naive question, but you're so polite, I know you'll take care of me. When I was reviewing this material and thinking about this issue, and I did go to the Arch workshop that we had over at the Sophia Way house, that was very nice. Thanks for hosting that. And when I'm looking at this proposal of having a 50-bed location for women and children, a 50-bed location for men in different places, and only one of each, and not only you've already addressed the cost issues of citing that, but I also thought, well, what about these people? All 50 women don't live in Redmond right now or have their lives or their families or the work that they're putting together and we're talking about them commuting to their shelter, and I just wondered about a more dispersed plan, and if somebody had considered that, and if that eased the barriers to siting, and then perhaps made it more so that those who are homeless in each community have opportunities to be served in their community.
It's a combination of factors. You can't necessarily get everything you're always looking for. In the past, there was nothing to preclude. When they first started the winter shelter, there was nothing to prevent that being the way it landed. I think it landed that way for two reasons. One is the physical space and getting the physical spaces. And if we try to, and the same would be the dilemma with capital, because where we want to go, to try to secure multiple properties is going to be pretty expensive. The second, though, and probably more important, is the staffing and the services. To try to serve, because every space needs to have one or two, at least someone awake at all times, and probably one or two staff people. So you're going to need that every location. So if you try to do 3 locations for each, all of a sudden you've tripled your operating costs because you're going to need the staffing. So it's the combination, and that's why having the transit service is so important, so that people can come and get, if they have other places to go, and having access and ways to get to day facilities, and we think on-site as well as others in the community. So, and it has been, I guess what I would say is, it seems to be working relatively well doing it that way. I mean, the agencies aren't saying, boy, we're doing it this way because we have to for these 2 reasons, and it's a real problem. I have not, in fact, the min have gone up to 70 or 80, and they didn't say doing that in one location is a problem. In fact, they're saying we can serve an extra 10 or 20 and we don't have to add any staffing. So we, at very minimal extra costs, we can get more people in shelter.
Thank you for being here. I was wondering if this is an innovative approach, because if it is, that's wonderful on its own. And if it's not, are we looking to anyone else for any other area, any other jurisdictions that might be doing anything similar for guidance on what?
That's a good question, and I guess I'd have to say we'll have to look into it. I'm not sure the shelter itself is unique, but the fact that we're kind of doing this with all the cities talking together, but we do that at Arch all the time, so I don't know. For us, it doesn't feel that unique, but it's a good idea to look into that, to see if there's some modeling. I do know we stole the Congregation for the Homeless, which is the group that's been running the men's shelter. They've been doing a rotating church shelter, which is different than this, for 24 years, and that idea was definitely stolen from another jurisdiction, I know. So that's a good idea, and we'll look into that.
We just might be able to learn some things.
No, exactly. Yeah, we are involving staff from King County and others from Seattle to say, help us understand better. But that's where we also want to say, it's while we can learn from others, we've also been doing this for 5 years, and just because they do it in another place, we still want it to fit over here. But we will definitely look into that.
Thank you.
Art, I have another question about the trust fund.
Okay.
So I think I heard you say, so how many members are in the Arch Coalition?
15, including King County.
15 plus King County. So when you come up with a proposal for a project to fund via the trust fund, every one of the 15 members plus King County is given their own consideration about whether to use any of their funds from the trust fund for a given project? Or do you always go to all 15 plus King County?
King County has its own process, so
Okay.
King County does not use Arch for funding.
Well, okay.
So many of the projects that we fund, King County is also funding through their system.
So of the 15 cities in Arch, where I'm getting at is, I'll just, not to pick on anybody, let's say Mercer Island doesn't think this is something they're going to want to support.
Right.
Well, you don't have to ask their council to allocate or authorize any of their funds in the trust fund for the program.
What would probably happen, I mean, this is sort of, in the past, we wouldn't necessarily, okay, we changed the interlocal agreement about 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, so that now we do one, everybody moves their money over to Bellevue. We can't spend it unless you say we can spend it, with, like you've always done. But now there's only one contract. Before then, we had to do a contract for every city. So we wouldn't necessarily ask every city because we didn't want to do 12 contracts for one project. Now that we're over that hurdle, if you look at the last funding round, we almost asked every city to fund every project. Okay, that everybody is sort of in there that has general fund dollars in. Some cities like Bothell have relied just on their CDBG. We have 2 members who have not done general fund dollars into the trust fund. All the others have. And so we look at what we have. They don't have to. It's all voluntary. We will, once the advisory board says, here's what you want to fund, we then have to also layer, we have some CDBG funds. So if we have a project that is trying to use this, which is a federal fund source, they have a lot of rules. And so we may have a project that's a fit for that, and we're going to say, we're going to put all our money in there, and we're not going to put our general fund dollars there because it's a fit for the CDBG funds. Okay? So we haven't universally in the past said every project, every city, all equal amounts. But more frequently now, once we take care of the CDBG funds, we are trying to say if cities have funds in, we're going to spread you around between all the projects. So in the process, we have a citizen advisory board, we have city staff providing input, and we have the executive board, all before it comes back to you. At any of those steps, if any of them start going, I don't know if that's a fit for our community, then we'll try to take account of that. But my personal experience is I have not seen a situation where we haven't gone to a city for a specific project because we think they didn't want to help support that kind of project. We've never had to deal with that. We've always been able to take any kind of project, and if there are funds in the sifting process we go through, said, here, this is part of it. And the councils as a whole are very good about understanding we're all trying to help. Sometimes it's in our town, sometimes it's not, but it's building towards regional needs. And so Medina and Clyde Hill, I know, helped fund the thing right down the street from the hill from their cities when we did Sophia Way, and they put funds in it, and they didn't have any concerns at all about doing that. So from that point of view, it's been a very positive experience.
Okay, so your experience so far has been all the 15 members have willingly participated, but you have the leverage during your process to say, we may
Yes.
solicit.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm going to repeat what I just said because my mic wasn't on. So historically, all members have participated, but you have the flexibility to really approach those members of the coalition you feel are going to participate or want to participate. So that's what I'm getting at. So it's not like one community can say, no, we're not going to, and that could stop the whole process.
Correct.
You've got more flexibility.
Or if that were to happen, then that would cut the amount of funds available for the project.
Right.
Right, so we're trying to understand the world well enough, our membership well enough, to hopefully come to you with proposals that you would find reasonable. Because we're your staff, and that's our job. So while we do it collectively, we're still keeping mind of every jurisdiction and trying to do things so that you'll want to be back next year for another project. So we try to be very cognizant of that. And that's one reason we're doing this sort of round here, is to see if any of the cities are saying why, to sort of give that opportunity for the councils to give us any thoughts and input. We try to tell you what we're looking at. You just gave us a suggestion of something you'd like us to look at, so we will. That's part of this, why we're here now, very early, is to make sure we're hearing any comments, concerns, or things that you want to make sure we look into as we do this work.
All right.
We're working for you on this.
Well, I appreciate that. Anybody have any more questions? Well, thank you very much, Arthur. Very informative, helpful. Appreciate you coming down here. And Trish, thanks for your support as well. So next we're going to move on to our second agenda items, and I see Gary Costa at the podium. He is firing up in 2 clicks. He had his presentation up on the screen. That's very good, Gary. Very impressive. So this topic is the ADA transition plan.
Correct.
And so It's all yours,
Members
Gary.
of the City Council and the members of the public. My name is Gary Costa, Transportation Manager. I'm here to present to you with the ADA transition plan, where we've come to date and where we're going and where we've been. And I also will be introducing our consultant, Susan Duncan from WH Pacific, who will be taking over the presentation when I'm done. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background. The American Disabilities Act was formed into law back in 1990, and they required, by 1995, local agencies were to have implemented and adopted an ADA transition plan. Well, what was interesting is that I don't think any agency in the state of Washington had adopted an ADA transition plan until several years ago. Bellevue has now adopted an ADA transition plan. As maybe you're aware, there are some cities, large cities, that had been into some trouble with the American with Disabilities Act. Department of Justice visited City of Sacramento, and so they were fined and had a very significant impact on their budget to bring their facilities up to standard. Seattle is being they're in a review right now that they're working with the Department of Justice. So it was just a few years ago that the FHWA started cracking down on some of the cities in the state of Washington, here anyway, in Washington State. And so the city of Issaquah started this process last year to start the transition plan, to start evaluating our facilities. We have the right-of-way area, within the right-of-way, the curb ramps and sidewalks, and then we have public facilities that are being reviewed also. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan, and I'm sure that we'll present some information for you that is very enlightening, and where we will go from there. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Susan Duncan, the Accessibility Manager for WH Pacific, and appreciate the opportunity to be able to share tonight how far we've come. And I want to start by thanking Gary and city staff. Been phenomenal in really being responsive and looking at the different elements that we need to have staff do. It's a large undertaking, and it takes a great cooperation from everyone. So a big thank you to Gary and all related staff that have been working on this. This is an ADA Title II self-evaluation and transition plan project, and we started a year ago, May, and we're anticipating by mid-November that we'll be complete. And so there's been many things that have happened through this period. So we wanted to give you first a project overview, just to let you know sort of what the main elements are, and reviewing with you about the Americans with Disabilities Act. Under Title II, as a state and local government, there are 5 titles in the ADA, and as a state and local government entity, you fall into Title II with the government requirements. What the scope of the work is, Gary has highlighted a little bit about what the scope of the project has been, where the progress to date has been, and then what the next steps will be. Looking at why and what we do in our environments, we're really designing and looking at environments to be for all ages and all abilities. People want to come and live and recreate and be a part of community, and come in with diversity. And the Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights law, and along with that comes the opportunity to come and participate and be a part of Salmon Days and all the other great things that happen in the community. So you can see we've got an increase happening with boomers and the use of mobility equipment. So we're seeing more and more use of scooters and wheelchairs and walkers. Now Segways, for example, are a part of the Americans with Disabilities Act as an approved power-driven mobility device. So you can see someone with a disability using a Segway coming into council chambers, coming into meetings, using out in the city sidewalks. Creating equality is a challenge, especially with all the existing infrastructure, and where you have the opportunity to do brand new construction, that's always ideal, but where we've got our existing infrastructure, that's a challenge. And so you can see the woman in the upper left-hand corner is a woman who is blind, using a cane, using the shoreline for cane detection. Tonight in driving downtown for the presentation tonight noticed the outdoor cafe seating and how that's partitioned off to be able to leave an accessible path of travel for the sidewalk and still have outdoor seating. So there are many things that come into competing interest in the environment. There are brand new guidelines available now to follow for golf and what needs to happen for creating the best equality that can happen on golf courses, etc. Discrimination, as we all know, is illegal. The primary two regulations that we really focus on is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504, and along with the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Those are our two primary regulations. Of course, there was earlier regulations than the 1973, but these are the two that we reference the most with our work. The ADA and the Rehab Act of 1973 requires all public agencies to complete a self-evaluation. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that self-evaluation looks like. Develop a transition plan, develop an ADA grievance and complaint procedure, and designate a responsible person within the agency. The intent of the ADA, and this comes from the regulation and language, is to ensure that the facilities are readily accessible to and usable by individuals with disabilities. And what I'm showing you in a photo here is a heave in the sidewalk. And that heave in the sidewalk may keep you from getting from point A to point B. You and I may be able to walk over that. Someone else may see that as a barrier trying to get up and over that and would become a barrier to get to the other side of that driveway apron, which is not compliant either, but just for pedestrian access route. So we have to ensure that all facilities, a curb ramp is considered a facility, just the same as this building is considered a facility, a sidewalk is a facility. So when we use the word facility, it's for all elements that we're looking at. In the Title II state and local government requirements, we're looking at all existing facilities. And in that, you're not required to have each individual facility meet compliance. So what that means is that if we can achieve compliance on this side of the street for an activity to get to this particular city government facility, this would be the side of the street that we would improve the pedestrian access route with, the sidewalks, the curb ramps, the parking, everything that goes along with this. And this would be the accessible side. Let's say there wasn't another government facility across the street, that you could say that this is the side of the street that you're going to do your activity on. Eventually, through your transition plan, eventually that could be something that you would feather into. But starting out, trying to figure out your priorities for your accessible routes, for example. The other part of this is getting into program access. And program access builds on this. Under Title II, you get to say, this is where we're going to hold council meetings, right? Let's say this building wasn't accessible and we could have council meetings across the street. This wouldn't then need to be compliant if this is the only thing that the public is doing in this building. Let's say we didn't have the other activities going on in this building, that this would be for staff use only. You could rededicate this for staff use only, and across the street then would be your council meetings or whatever else you're doing with the public. So as long as your services, programs, and activities are accessible, you get to decide where that is. And that's part of the process that goes into this evaluation. Well, we're looking at all the physical elements that are keeping us from having equality. We're also looking at what your program services and activities are that may be discriminatory. So program access is at the core of all of this work. The scope of work started with departmental self-evaluation. And the departmental self-evaluation was for all 13 of the departments to go through and complete about 36 pages of questions. And those were very detailed about how different activities are happening with procedures and policies and such. And we've got that all compiled now, and we'll be putting that into the report. It's important to understand that if you have a no animal policy, for example, that no animals can come into your public buildings, for example, that that has to be modified to say, other than service animals, because service animals, of course, are a part of, the support for an individual with a disability that uses a service animal. So while it's not ill intent to say a no animal or a no dog policy, you do have to make sure that in there you're not being discriminatory by, certainly allowing service animals. The ADA field survey assessments and the reports then are for all the public right-of-way facilities. And that, as Gary had indicated, is certainly for curb ramps, for sidewalks, for accessible pedestrian signals, for on-street parking. So it's a very detailed list of what's been assessed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Park facilities, there are 17 park facilities that have been assessed. There are 6 trails of your urban walkable trails, and then 17 of your building facilities. And then certainly the project scope is about writing the transition plan and looking at the development of that. And then, of course, at the very end of the day is the city council adoption. The self-evaluation process, as I had mentioned, was a questionnaire completed by all 13 of the departments, reviewing program services and activities, and then compiling those findings. The transition plan requirements include the inventory of all the facilities, really identifying and prioritizing those. So the ADA helps us prioritize basic groups. For example, getting access to all government facilities. So that would be priority number 1. You may further identify that to say, you know what, coming to City Hall, we need to work on these things first. So that may be even a number 1 priority over and above. Safe routes to school, getting to commercial businesses, etc. And the 4th area is the residential area, which is generally identified and worked with on a barrier removal request process as areas in the community, in the residential communities become updated. Then a schedule is attached to this. As Gary indicated, transition plans were to be done and complete by 1995, and everything from there forward was going to be done to meet the federal law with the design standards. And many, many agencies throughout the United States haven't done that, didn't do that. I was involved in that in the very beginning in 1990, and there were just a few communities that did transition plans. Mostly it was getting the inventory done, and then they become dust collectors and didn't keep them up to date. So this will be the last time and the only time that you'll have to do a transition plan. You'll be building on this because this is now an active dynamic document. Budgetary costs, we'll get into this, and then designate an individual within the city that will coordinate the implementation of this. And then part of this process is to include individuals from the community, which includes individuals with disabilities. After all, this is at the core of the process, is to ensure that we're really hitting the areas that people with disabilities like to frequent and want to be a part of, and making sure that the plan reflects that accordingly. And it's required to be updated periodically. And typically what we see are that agencies once a year then say, okay, where are you with your funding? What have you been doing with your general fund, or however you're setting aside the funding for this, and then get a status report every year of what's been going on, if not more frequently than that. Last year, Gary's team retained 4 terrific engineers in interns. And you can see the photo of the 4 interns. We put them through a very rigorous training, and part of that was to help them understand if they were simulating being an individual who was blind, what that was like, to understand when they came across trip hazards in the path that we were taking them through. So they wore room darkening glasses, and there's a variety of techniques to help them be sensitive so that when they were in the field assessing sidewalks and curb ramps and driveway approaches, for example, they really understand the significance of a potential trip hazard and what was compliant, what wasn't compliant. So the student interns were one of the best sets of interns that I've been able to work with, and really great job on Gary and team hiring terrific interns. to help put that together. The field assessment and report development, all the field assessments are complete now, so we're completely done with everything in the inventory. The reports and the cost estimates are complete for all the public right-of-way elements, and that's no easy chore. I mean, you've got a lot of sidewalk and curb ramp and public right-of-way elements. The accessible pedestrian signals are done, so all of those are now complete with the inventory and the costing done with those. The curb ramps are all assessed with costing to that. Sidewalks, which is pedestrian access routes or PAR, and then on-street parking, and last but not least, parks. So all of that's been complete with the reports and the cost estimating. What we're still in development on is the vertical buildings. So we're narrowing down the road here to get up, finishing up the vertical building reports and the 6 trail reports. And so then we'll be finished with that within the next month and be ready to get into finishing up the draft. The draft is well underway of the transition plan and self-evaluation. The next steps that we would like to briefly talk about after we're done is the draft, which we just spoke about, and looking at the timing for that, submitting the draft to council and city staff for comment, presenting it to city council. So we think it's a great effort to be able to review a document before it's ready to come to you, and then we can say, here's the highlights of the findings. And then from that, it goes out for public review and comment. Best practices is anywhere from 30 to 60 days. You could say 30 days for your public comment period, and there's some good ways to be able to do that. And then finalize it and submit it then for council adoption, so it's moving forward from there. So that is the basic overview of, what's happened, where it's been, and what's left to do to complete the process. So like very much to open up for questions and see what we can do to field those.
Questions? Stacy?
I just have a couple of questions. Do you have a timeline on when you think the draft would be presented, when it
Yes,
would be ready?
We do. In our schedule, which is always one of those flexible things, in our project schedule, we would like to have the plan to you by mid-August so that you've got the opportunity to read that, mid-September, so that the end of September we can do a formal presentation to you to highlight that and then be ready for it to go out for public comment for 30 days or whatever you choose to do. We're shooting for the middle of November to be completely done and ready for you to have the documents to move forward into whatever your process is for adoption.
Okay.
So early September, mid-September at the latest for you to have a few weeks to review it and then get ready for us to come back to you with a final finding.
And this is, I may have missed it during Gary's introduction, but this is public accommodation, not workplace accommodation.
That's right. This is not Title I.
Yep.
Title I of the ADA is about workplace accommodation, and that is not a part of this process. This is about the title to work on the facilities and the meeting of compliance with that. There will be additional work that will need to happen on your policies and procedures as you go through, as city staff goes through those to say, okay, how are we doing? Because we do have the self-evaluation compilation, and then it will be staff to go through and say, okay, we did really good on these things, and these things were a little weaker on.
And any idea on years to complete the transition plan?
I would say probably you're looking at maybe 20 years.
Okay.
You can take as many years as you need to. What the Department of Justice is looking for is your good faith effort to have one,
Okay.
and that you're working on that. Right now, as Gary had indicated, there are over 200 settlement agreements, consent decrees with the Department of Justice under Project Civic Access. So if you went to the Project Civic Access site and went through that, one of the first ones I worked on was for the city of Mount Vernon in 2000. Janet Reno began the program in 1999 saying, cities, counties, Title II entities are not coming to the table to meet compliance. We got to do something. So they're out doing individual investigations, and they're also taking complaints by individuals with disabilities that are filing complaints. Then they begin the research. The city of Bend, for example, started with complaints with individuals with disabilities that couldn't get into City Hall and some of those kinds of things. The investigation went further into a full then settlement agreement, and they're still sitting on $34 million left in curb ramps to do, and they haven't even assessed sidewalks, but the vertical buildings are done. So, and it's a 10-year settlement agreement, and that's up in September for the DOJ to come back and say, you know what, you still have more work to do, or whatever it is that they're going to do. So I'm thinking probably 20 years or so, depends upon how you're going to do the funding and what your schedule is going to do, how much can go into CIP projects, your complete streets programs, all those other kinds of things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Stacy's question and your answer answered my questions as well.
Oh,
So,
good. Usually they kind of go in tandem, so.
yeah, duration.
Yeah,
and,
duration.
You know, the latitude we have for funding sources, depending on the project and the various
Right.
funds that we have.
Right.
I just wanted to add that, there are, when we're doing capital projects, we're making sure that all of our improvements are meeting ADA, and also any new development are coming in, they're making sure ADA are met too. So, we're, in the process of bringing some of our facilities up to date too.
Okay.
And the asset management. So the asset management of all of this is very important, that, assigning a curb ramp number, for example. So when someone's going to understand what they're going to be doing in work, they already know that these 3 are compliant and that 4th one is not, and that's the one that needs to come out. So this is very much about asset management, and that's part of the ongoing CIP work that the city's doing.
Josh.
Thanks. I think that's on. You mentioned new development, Gary, and it got me thinking that, we've been looking a lot at impact fees for traffic mitigation, but depending on how significant this 20-year list or, however long this takes might be in terms of capital funding, it certainly lends some thought to the idea of accessibility mitigation fees or ADA compliance mitigation, so that, if you have new development that's creating additional sidewalks or access points or that sort of thing, they're not just paying in for their fair share of traffic demand management, but rather, in addition to that, accessibility demand management. So just something to throw out there for consideration as we go through our impact fees discussions this year. But it sounds like it's going to be a pretty significant investment, and you have to wonder where we're going to be able to find the funding for this mandate.
Exactly.
And that is a huge issue. That is a huge issue, because what the Department of Justice has said is by 1995 you're done with your transition plan, and maybe you have a year or two after that to come up to, to meet compliance. And so now here we are in 2014. The Department of Justice is not concerned about how much money you have in your community to do something. It's meeting compliance and creating accessible environments. So that's why getting in and really looking at your program and where can you do something now to get this going versus something else, and prioritizing accordingly with program access.
Thank you. Nice idea, Josh. It just, we may be needing a lot of creative thinking like that. Anything else? Well, thank you so much, Gary, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Susan, thank you for being here this evening. It was very informative. Okay, the next item on this evening's agenda is our regional committee reports. Now, we've been handling this during our regular council meetings, so really just think of this, as another opportunity to report on your regional committees. The council committees, not so much. So, Nina, I believe you're an alternate on Cascade Water Alliance. Do you have a report?
I am. Thank you, Paul. I am an alternate to Mayor Fred Butler, who is an officer on the board and has been for a long time, so I'm in really good hands and learning a lot from him. I would like to share that Cascade Water Alliance, I had known before I got this appointment, but I'm learning it more and more, the esteem that they have earned over the years at developing a regional water approach. And it's really great as a member of Issaquah to be a member city. And each of us members have a lot of pride. And I went on a tour of Lake Tapps, which was a big acquisition, part of the regional plan. And it was exciting to be there and say, yeah, this is our lake. And thinking on behalf of our city that we own a piece of that lake for our long-term security and our water supplies. And in that, more technically speaking, we're in the final stages of the negotiations and approvals with the state for the water right for the transition from the previous owner, Puget Sound Energy, or whatever they were at the time they got the water right, and then bringing that water right over to another party because we bought the real estate and the water right. And it's a complicated process, but it couldn't be in better hands. And so I'm really enjoying that, and there'll be more, probably a lot of news on that when that finishes up.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you. Josh, you gave a detailed report from Eastside Transportation Partnership last time. Do you have any update for us?
There are a few things coming up for me that I'll be doing in the next few weeks. Couple of all-day retreats and a telephone call. I guess just chronologically, Thursday I'm going to be attending an all-day retreat for the Bellevue College Foundation, and I'll be listening carefully if there's any issues pertaining to East Campus that come up at that, but it's our annual year-end planning session, all-day meeting. Friday, I'm going to be participating in a phone call conducted by Mayor Ed Murray and City of Seattle staff with other elected officials, and it's a discussion that Seattle wants to have about transportation needs and a proposal by Mayor Murray concerning funding for transportation in the wake of Metro bus service cuts. So that call is expected to last about an hour or so on Friday afternoon. And then July 11th, as I reported previously, is the all-day ETP retreat, which I believe will be held in Redmond. I don't think we've disclosed the details of location and exact starting time, but I think it's probably going to start around 8 in the morning, so maybe not as early as our usual 7:30 bright and early start. But that'll be an all-day ETP discussion about our mission, our goals, where the organization is headed, and I don't think we've ever done anything like that before, so this will be a great opportunity, and certainly, any of you are welcome to attend if you wish, to be there. But I know we've got our official members and alternates who will hopefully be there as well. That's all I've got.
All right, thank you. Stacy, you're an alternate on the Eastside Transportation Partnership and Sound Cities Association. Do you have anything to report?
I don't for Sound Cities, but I will be attending the ETP all-day retreat. So excited for that.
All right, thank you.
Especially to hear the agenda. That's carefully kept under wraps.
Yeah, so I participate in, I chair the Eastside Human Services Forum. I'm also a member of the Joint Recommendations Committee. So everything that Arthur was talking about this evening when he was talking about CDBG and county funds, they administer funds both that they receive from the state and from HUD, the federal agency as well. And so the actual, the JRC, Joint Recommendations Committee, is actually is the final approver of those fund distributions. So I definitely will be involved. And there is some long-range planning. There's a 5-year policy. Every 5 years, a policy guidelines, comprehensive plan update is done. And so we're in the process of updating those policies right now, and we have staff that are involved, I believe, from the Development Services Organization that's part of the formation of those new policies. And the Eastside Human Services Forum last 2 weeks ago, we held an event, sponsored an event in Bellevue, a discussion about minimum wage and livable wage after Seattle's action in their plan to increase the minimum wage to step that up to $15 per hour, either over the next 3 or 7 years, I think, depending on the organization. There certainly will be implications for the East Side. We had a panel there Our State Senator Mark Mullet was a member of the panel. We had a small business representative from Seattle. We had a human services agency representative from ARC of King County and a woman from the San Francisco Human Services Network. It has a lot of experience in that same area. It was a very good conversation. Councilmember Pauley was there, and we had a couple staff people there as well. We had representatives, even members of the Issaquah Chamber attended. I had invited them and other members from the human services community here in Issaquah as well. And so it was really, the intent was just to have a dialogue. We're not looking at any policy right now. I did learn in that there was a bill that never saw the floor in Olympia last year. So whether or not there's support for something like that for a statewide related to the minimum wage is, well, it's down there in Olympia. It didn't get very far last year. Who knows how far it will go in the future. But that was the latest event. We don't meet again until September for the Eastside Human Services Forum. So that's all I have. And I'm going to turn to our city administrator, who's not on a mic, and just wondering if you have any report or update from us. Mayor Butler is an alternate on the PSRC Transportation Policy Board. Do you have anything that you can share with us about that?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, I just thought I'm not
thanks
surprised. I didn't give you a heads up at all. So I'm just looking at my sheet where everybody is. I realize, hey, we have representation there. So perhaps in a future committee of the whole meeting. So I believe, thank you for those reports. I'm going to check our agenda, and I believe we are done for this evening. We are, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.